skills and the necessary investments in workforce and education. I'm the Director of Government Affairs at National Skills Coalition. My name is Katie Spiker. First, I want to get things started by thanking Senator Feinstein's office for co-sponsoring the briefing with the Campaign to Invest in America's Workforce, or CIAW. CIAW is a coalition of national organizations that focus on the importance of federal appropriations that support workforce and education programs. And special thanks to CIAW partners, Advanced CTE, the U.S. Workforce Association, and the Coalition on Adult Basic Education for bringing together the panelists who are going to be part of our conversation today. Today's briefing is happening in recognition of Workforce Development Month, a bipartisan resolution on which was led by Senators Feinstein, Enzi, Baldwin, and Young, and passed this week. We're going to talk with our expert panelists for about 45 minutes of the hour, and then we'll turn to Q&A from the audience, so I hope folks will submit those questions throughout our discussion. We're also recording today's conversation, and we'll circulate it to folks who registered and to attendees afterwards. So after the logistics, why are we here talking about skills right now? The current crisis has had a historic impact on workers and on businesses. America certainly cannot train its way out of our current economic crisis. Neither can skill policy shoulder alone the weight of a more inclusive economic recovery that's necessary on our path forward. But skills policy has an essential role to play and must be part of how we move forward over the next couple of months. Workers need skills now to access open positions. Out of the nearly 60 million people who have filed for unemployment since March, more than 40% of those have been workers who earn less than $40,000 a year. And the crisis has disproportionately impacted workers without any education past high school, workers who already needed access to skills prior to the pandemic. Workers with a high school degree or less have been displaced at nearly 3 times the rate of those with a bachelor's degree. Workers of color, in particular women of color, have shouldered the greatest job losses due to their concentration in low-wage service industries that have been the hardest hit by the economic downturn. At the same time, for small local businesses, the economic disruption from the first month of the pandemic alone could cause 1.4 million to 2.1 million of them to close, according to a recent study by McKinsey. Minority-owned small business, which employ more than 8.7 million workers, are most vulnerable because they are disproportionately represented in sectors that are most likely to see permanent closures, such as storefront retail, bars, restaurants, travel, hospitality. Our career and technical education and public workforce systems have the experience and expertise to help job seekers access skills and find new jobs, but our country has, comparatively and historically, so underinvested in these systems that we're putting workers and businesses at even further risk. Funding for the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which funds and supports our public workforce system, has declined by 40% since 2001. Funding for career and technical education by almost 30%, and for adults education by almost 15%. The United States invests less in active labor market policies than every other industrialized country except for Mexico. In order to reach even the median level of investment of our international peers, we need to invest $80 billion with a B dollars more each year. For a global crisis, and given our global economy, our underinvestment in skills hurts workers, holds back businesses, and harms communities. The public workforce, adult and career and technical education systems have evidence-backed strategies to help workers connect with training and supports necessary for good jobs, but need federal investment to employ these. And so now I'll turn to our panelists to talk about what the challenges look like on the ground and to put a face and stories and reality to those statistics that I just shared. One last stat before I do so. According to recent polling by the National Skills Coalition, 82% of respondents want investments in skills today as a step forward towards recovery, and 81% see skills as a critical part of our long-term strategy. Today we'll hear from our national and local experts on workforce development, discuss what's working, the level of investment and that's currently included for our workforce, and the innovation that would help move us forward towards an inclusive economic recovery. So now I'll introduce our panelists. First, Rebecca Aguilera Gardner, Vice President and co-owner of Diego & Sons Printing. Anson Green, Senior Manager of Economic Opportunity at Tyson Foods. Donnie Jones, Chief Operating Officer, Chamber of Commerce of West Alabama and Executive Director of West Alabama Works. Melinda Mack, Executive Director, New York Association of Training and Employment Professionals, and Brittany Williams, Assistant Executive Director for Career and Technical Education and incoming State CTE Director for the Louisiana Community and Technical College System. So thank you all for being here again. Donnie, I want to start with you. You sit at the nexus of education, workforce, and business as both the COO of the West Alabama Chamber and the Executive Director of West Alabama Works, the Workforce Board. Can you talk about what the current crisis has meant for both workers and businesses in your area?
Absolutely. One of the things that we're seeing is the lack of pathways. And two, of course, when you look at our region, it's over 7,500 square miles, but there's a lot of rural counties. Transportation, the barriers to workforce is a critical issue that we're faced with every single day. And so as we're moving forward, we've got to see more braided funding. We've got to see more industry-driven models that actually produce more of those workers, because our population, for example, in Alabama is not growing rapid enough to meet the needs of all of our industry growth. And so we've got to do a better job of helping individuals know those pathways, getting them engaged into the training that they need, and then also getting them involved in apprenticeship programs and some of our other training programs that are readily available. Some of the things we're doing, of course, is getting people more involved in our mobile training. So we actually have units that are going into the highways and byways of our rural counties and actually turning over every rock and trying to get people more engaged, and also the participation rates in workforce is a key thing that we're working on here in Alabama.
Can you talk a little bit about those participation rates and what you're seeing right now, Donnie?
Yeah, absolutely. We had one of the lowest participation rates in the U.S., but in the last couple of years, we actually have had some of the greatest growths. And what we're doing there is actually going in and doing outreach events believe it or not, in the elementary schools. So we're actually doing outreach events for the parents. And what we found is people are more engaged and feel more comfortable in their elementary schools than any other facility in community. So we found that out. So we're involving and engaging our religious institutions, our school systems, to actually get more adults engaged and involved and feel more comfortable. And then we're able to actually navigate them. And we actually have a team of navigators. It's almost like caseworkers for workforce development that is working people through those challenges that they have. And I think that's what's so important. Just throwing training dollars at the problem and thinking we're going to fix workforce development is not going to be the solution. It has to be a holistic and systemic process that meets those needs and those barriers. And the other thing that we're really looking at in partnership with the Federal Reserve Bank is actually the benefits cliff. So we have so many people that we're getting into training, but they actually jump out of that training because of the benefits cliff. For example, their food stamps, their children's Medicaid programs, their health programs, those types of things, and it's causing barriers. So we've got to learn as a workforce system to actually have holistic approaches to meeting the needs of individuals where they are. I think that's very important when we're talking to our partners in the Hill, is them to actually understand that the training and the education side is important, but just as important are those wraparound services and helping those other organizations, our nonprofits, understand how to surround the workforce system and actually help people through and to navigate the waters.
That's such an important point, and one that I think we'll hit on a few times today, especially when we turn back to thinking about what has changed and what are the even increased challenges that folks are facing right now because of the pandemic. Rebecca, I want to turn to you to talk about from your business's perspective, what role do skills play now in your work and how you're working through this unprecedented time?
Well, so thank you, Katie. So I'm Rebecca. I'm I am vice president of a small family-owned printing business in San Diego. So we're manufacturers, and because of this pandemic, it has been very difficult for, I'm sure, like a lot of small businesses. We've had to lay people off, and how we're working through this is simply, to tell you the truth, we're not. It's difficult. Every week it changes, not only with the workforce, but with, funding and everything. So, there's a lot of things hitting small business right now. But one of the things that really hurts us as a small business is we've had to let go of our employees who are older employees because we're a skilled workforce. And so we have a lot of older employees going into the workforce, 50 and up, who have mortgages, who has families to take care of. And, you know, they're going into this workforce with no skills except for printing and manufacturing. So we realized that as a small business owner, these people were our family, and we want to make sure that they're taken care of. And it's important to have these training and various um, um, the various abilities to send them to places so they can upskill what they've learned. And you know, it has been a difficult time, and for everyone. And I think just the older workforce, I don't think people realize how much that's going to affect, you know, our economy in the future. A lot of these skilled workers who were making really good money are having to retrain themselves and maybe getting half of what they used to. So, so I mean, they are looking for jobs that are comparable, at least to what they were making beforehand. So, learning skills that is going to help them, you know, take care of their family and take care of, you know, their mortgage and everything, I think is vital for employment. And training is exactly where it needs to be. The money needs to be there for these people to get past, you know, this hump, like all of us.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thanks for being here. Just a note that Rebecca and Donnie, we're both part of a Business Leaders United fly-in that National Skills Coalition and our partners with Blue did this week. So both of you taking multiple days out of your work in order to talk to the Hill about the importance of skills from a business perspective is really poignant to the impact that you see that having on your work. So I want to turn now to Anson and round out our business representatives on the panel. Could you talk about your role at Tyson, and given your previous role as State Director of Adult Education in Texas, what role upskilling has for workers at Tyson Foods right now?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm excited to be participating on this panel. I'm coming to you from Tyson Foods in Springdale, Arkansas via San Antonio. But I'm a recent Fortune 100 transplant. I've had 25 years in workforce development on the public sector side. I ran a community college campus for immigrants and refugees in San Antonio. I was the state director for adult education and literacy, began my career teaching GED class. So I've got a lot of different perspectives that come into this and know the value that the federal investments make in the states, and want to really reconfirm that. The piece that I think we need to really focus on is how we can reconfirm the benefits of these public investments in the private sector. There are so many social, community, and economic investments that are made, and right now, during as we work through the pandemic and look at rebuilding, these things are, especially for the adult education, lower skilled populations, just instrumental. The students in adult education, as was mentioned previously, are some of the hardest hit during the pandemic. So engaging with businesses really provides a supportive recovery model for that frontline workforce, that entry-level workforce that is the highest unemployment rates that our states have right now. We have a great federal law to support adult education and workforce development called the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. It was dramatically revised in 2014, and it was really redesigned to help businesses. But you might be wondering, like, what is Tyson's role in this? Well, we're one of the biggest food companies in the world, and we employ about 121,000 frontline team members. 60% of those workers are refugees and immigrants from over 60 countries, speaking over 50 languages. The grade level equivalents are between 3 and 6 years, with many of our workers having zero literacy in their native language, much less English. So working with public agencies like Adult Education Partners has been instrumental for us to stabilize and expand economic opportunities for our workers, but also for the communities that our plants lie. So for about the last 4 years, we've implemented a program that was a great public-private partnership model with the adult education federally funded programs across the states. We have 60 different providers in 17 states operating with us in a partnership to help upskill our workers in English as a second language, high school equivalency, citizenship, and real important right now, digital literacy skills. Just in the last few months, we have done over 800 of our workers have received digital literacy upgrading and upskilling through our public-private partnerships. We have about 2,500 workers in our plants enrolled in those programs across the country. We've adapted to the pandemic. We've gone to remote learning. We've gone to external classrooms that are socially distanced, and that has been a big impact, but we have muscled through with our public partners, and I think that has really shown the way for how much investment this means to the company and how we need to continue that investment into the future. The impacts are huge for us. Stability in our workforce, increasing equity, bringing new ideas from our frontline workforce to management are critical objectives that we have in the company. And overall, they increase our social and competitive advantage in the labor market. We measure all kinds of things at Tyson Foods, as you can imagine. And during for Upward Academy, our adult education partnership, we are looking at things like our retention, our return on investments, our loyalty from the workers that are in these classes and how much that has grown. The measurements of trust and communication with our supervisors in the plants are things that we're looking at, and we have seen tremendous growth. 85% of the students that are in our adult education partnerships have reported that program, that adult education service, 85% was a factor in them retaining their job and staying with Tyson. 86% have reported increased communications and comfort and trust working with their supervisors and understanding what they're supposed to be doing on the line. We've got great measures on improvements in our community relations with these workers as they can communicate and work better in their communities in the English language. 85% are more satisfied at work, and 77% feel more loyal to Tyson as a report of as an example of those outcomes. We've also seen great reductions in terminations in program participants, and that's a high cost for any business. So these partnerships, these are win-win partnerships with public and private sector. I can't really speak enough about how these alliances with businesses open doors, new opportunities, new students, new funding, helping reemploy those that are unemployed, helping to upskill those individuals that are sometimes languishing in low-skilled jobs and want to move up to help support their families and their communities. There's great benefits, but there's also challenges. We have noticed just in the last few months with the pandemic and with the recession that oftentimes these are the types of classes that get cut first. And we are seeing cuts in classes across the state almost exclusively due to budget reductions at the state levels and federal levels. And that is something that we really think is going to undermine what we're trying to do at Tyson, which is to really reemploy individuals and to upskill those individuals that we've retained in our workforce.
That's such a frustrating but illustrative through line that you were able to see directly to the number of workers being trained, to the investments that we can make at the federal and state level. Melinda, you represent the State Association of Local Boards in New York. Can you talk a little bit about what you all are seeing now and the skills needs that you're facing?
Sure, and I'll expand to say we don't only represent the workforce boards, we also represent the community colleges, the literacy providers, disability service providers. When you think workforce, the whole network is part of our association and our group. And it's been interesting because I think one of the pieces that's really critical to underscore here is during the last recession, states and local communities often had more resources at hand in order to be able to make up some of the gaps while we waited for the federal government to come through with a bigger stimulus. And so in a state like New York, our state is really facing an extreme budget crisis because of the direct and serious impacts of COVID-19, not only on New Yorkers, but on families, businesses, extended family. I mean, it's pretty insane, honestly, in terms of what we've dealt with in New York State as it relates to COVID-19. But in reality, what it also means is that the resources that the state typically could float for job training or to provide additional services to support small businesses and small business recovery, those dollars just aren't there this time around. For us, what it means is we have just about 5 million people who are receiving some form of unemployment insurance or pandemic unemployment assistance or compensation. It means that we know that based on the JOLTS data, which comes out of, BLS, that there's 2.5 people looking for every one job that's available in New York State. And we also know that the biggest sectors that are impacted are accommodations and food service, retail, hospitality and tourism, sectors that traditionally, in some ways, are the core of some communities in terms of their small business and sort of tax revenue and sales tax base. But in reality, those are the jobs that are going to be the slowest to return. And so for us, we're trying to figure out and really sort of make smart investments around how we help workers who we know are not going to be able to get back to work because the jobs are just not going to be there. Upskill with digital literacy, upskill with English language learning, upskill and get their high school equivalency or credential that will allow them to have more options when they end up getting into employment. I mean, the last thing that I will say, and I'll underscore, especially for congressional staff who are on the call, if you have not read the United Way's ALICE report, which is a report that talks about people who are asset limited, income constrained, and employed, it's really important that you take a look at it for your state. The ALICE report for us underscores that even when the times were good, 45% of New Yorkers were considered to be working poor. And so these are people who are doing all the right things that are still on the brink of being able to make ends meet, often piecing together a couple of jobs to be able to pay for their family's needs. And so as Donnie and Anson and others have shared, it's so important that we really think about what those wraparound supports look like, because people got their last paycheck a long time ago, and they've basically eaten through their savings at this point. And so we really have to think about how we transition people back to employment and keep them whole, because if your basic needs aren't met, you're not going to be able to participate in job training. So again, I think the urgency here is much greater than it was the last recession, because I think the needs are so much deeper and more severe this time around.
Thanks, Melinda. Brittany, I want to turn to you to run out our panelists in this thought about introducing some of the work and the challenges. Melinda mentioned the role of the community colleges in the New York workforce ecosystem. What challenges have community and technical colleges in Louisiana faced, and what role have they played in addressing the crisis?
Thanks, Katie. Louisiana hasn't been spared from the rising unemployment rates and economic hardships due to COVID. But this week, my agency, Louisiana Community and Technical College System, launched Reboot Your Career, a program designed to support workers who may be unemployed due to COVID-19, and then retrain them for available jobs in high-wage, high-demand career pathways. The 12 community colleges have proposed to train at least 5,000 people this fiscal year in short-term programs. This is unprecedented for us. The trainings will be aimed at 12 weeks in length, with most programs lasting about 8 weeks. The certifications earned will be focused on those that, number one, place completers in jobs earning at least $50,000 annually, and are part of a career path where additional certifications and education will allow for advancement. The certifications will be also focused on those skill sets most in demand for their respective regions. Those may include industrial technology, healthcare, transportation and logistics, manufacturing, and information technology. This regional approach is something new for our state. Because the state's occupational forecast projects short-term and long-term employer demand occupations at the regional level, we set up regional teams to better target the needs of industry. For us, that's small and medium-sized enterprises in Louisiana, and to ensure that the federal funds spent were focused on achieving the most positive outcomes for all of our stakeholders: students, parents, K-12, post-secondary, adult education, corrections, workforce, economic development, business and industry, philanthropic, community, and equity groups. As you may know, Perkins funds are intended to support programs that lead to high-skill, high-wage, in-demand occupations. We target our state funds in a similar fashion. Our Louisiana Workforce Investment Council and the Louisiana Workforce Commission have defined high-wage careers as one with an average hourly rate equal to or greater than the average hourly rate of all occupations reported by the Louisiana Workforce Commission. In addition, in-demand industries are defined as occupations in which state, local, and regional market data shows that there's a demand exceeding the projected employment supply. The Louisiana Workforce Commission here rates our jobs on demand on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being the least demand and 5 being the highest demand. Typically, we fund those occupations that are rated 4 and 5 stars. We consider 3-star jobs if the training is a part of a larger career ladder. In addition, high skill occupations require industry recognized credentials, certifications, post-secondary training, apprenticeships, and post-secondary degrees. We encourage our regions and our stakeholders to target their funds to those top 3 career clusters in order for us to see the greatest impact. And so far, we've been seeing a lot of benefits from that.
That's such a great overview of the strategy that the state's employing, Brittany. I want to turn to the next set of questions for each of you, and really thinking about what the systems need, what businesses need, what workers need right now, and what's the impact you all are seeing and challenges because of a lack of federal investment, both historically and in our current crisis. So Rebecca and Anson, I'll start with you from a business perspective. What has it meant that you're not, even in this time of unprecedented unemployment, able to find skilled workers and still facing skilled challenges?
So one of the things that we are doing is actually we've partnered with the other printing businesses in our area all the way up to LA. Because everybody is losing employees. We have a lot of friends in printing, and so if when we lost some of our employees, we reached out to them to see who. I mean, and this goes up as far as Oregon. To see if anybody has any positions available. So we're utilizing our network to try to put our workforce into other positions that we know. And it has been, a little bit successful. A couple of people have gotten new jobs with other print shops, which actually is not great, because when things do come back, we might not get them back. But now that we've kind of created our own little coalition of printers sharing, our job skills and our workers, we feel a little more comfortable, reaching out to them and seeing who they have available as well. So that's kind of something that we as printers and manufacturers have, created ourselves, to kind of, help each other out, and, and just trading business as well. However we all can survive, is great. We're no longer in competition. We're in this together. So that's just one of the things that we're doing for our workforce in order to make sure that they can find jobs is connecting with our partners in manufacturing.
That's such a good point. And supporting those industry partnerships is a required activity for states and an allowable use of funds under WIOA. But one of the things that, because the system is underfunded, is often difficult for local areas to realize given the funding levels. Anson, what about from a Tyson Foods perspective? Anson, you're still on mute. I was too when I tried to tell you that you were on mute.
That's okay. Yeah, the skill needs and development for Tyson Foods is something we see shared with other industry partners, small and large. We hire a lot of people in Tyson Foods. Some of our plants are in communities where Tyson is by far the biggest employer, 5,000 workers in some of our plants. So we're always hiring people. And in hiring those folks, we are often hiring from populations that need basic education. They need basic employability skills, leadership skills, and getting that flow from our public partners, not just out of high schools, but out of community colleges, out of community-based organizations, out of faith-based organizations, is essential for us to keep our plants staffed. The piece that's important for us at Tyson too is making sure that these partnerships aren't just about employment, but they're about how do we help retain our workers and grow our workers within our company. We want to be able to upskill and invest in our workforce, and do that with our our public sector partners, our community colleges, our public schools, our workforce development boards. And so that partnership in finding ways to make that work through the federal legislation and through funding is important for us. It helps the public sectors out because they have a desire and really a mandate under the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act to work with businesses. They're measured on that. And we have a desire to work with them and gain their expertise. I would say right now, areas like digital literacy, which has just become ubiquitous in everybody's life, is something many, many of our workers lack. But it's also a competency that we feel like we can gain best from our public partners, especially our adult education community, who are experts at teaching low-skilled individuals technology and digital literacy. So it's things like that, those examples that we really see we need to not maintain, but really build and bolster as we pull out of the pandemic, because those investments really have a multiplier effect, not only for the workers and the public systems, but for the employer and the communities where the employer resides.
That's such a good point about the broad-reaching impacts. One of my colleagues at National Skills Coalition, Amanda Bergson-Chilcock, just analyzed some data on digital literacy and found that nearly 1/3 of the U.S. workforce has low or no digital literacy skills, putting them even at further at risk during our current pandemic. And I know, Nancy, you've done a lot of work with Amanda along some of the best strategies to help workers gain those skills. Melinda and Donnie, turning to you from the workforce perspective, what does it mean that workforce boards and the workforce communities with which you're working haven't had funding to serve the scale of workers that right now are out of work?
So I'm happy to go first. I think, again, part of this is thinking about how the formula funding comes to local communities, right? New York's economy was going bonkers before COVID hit. I mean, our unemployment rate was hovering below 3% in some places, and in places where it was high, it was around 4%. And so it meant that the formula funds coming to New York State were really limited, right? So COVID hit, we actually had some of the smallest numbers in terms of dollars coming to the state around workforce services. And at this point, we're sort of in this process of trying to figure out how much would potentially come in when the formula funds start to flow again. So I say that because what it means is that career centers are really down to bare bones staff. And so we're getting creative again in our state, just like everyone here, around how we can increase partnerships. But again, this is at the expense of, you know, people working 12, 15-hour days, really trying to do things on a shoestring budget, and providing in some ways nowhere near the intensive services that are necessary. The first thing to go in almost every instance for workforce dollars is training funds. Those tend to be the first thing that have to sort of dry up when the resources are light. But that being said, I think one of the things that our state has done really well is taken advantage, again, locally, of the really great opportunities that are coming our way. So similar to what Brittany is experiencing in Louisiana, in the City University of New York, they have a 90-day CUNY upskilling challenge, where they basically have taken all these free resources coming from LinkedIn, Coursera, all these other resources that in some ways are typically unattainable for many of the folks who are coming through the Career Center system, and getting people attached to that in the meantime while we wait for some of the additional training resources to come online. The last thing I will say is I think the big piece for us has been really focusing on where there's flexibility in existing law and policy at the federal and state level. So we're going deep on looking, similar to Donnie, to the benefits cliff. How do we make sure that we're really flexing where we can under temporary assistance for needy families and food stamp legislation to make sure that we can be as flexible as possible? How are we as flexible as possible in thinking about digital literacy? Again, the fact that 42% of New Yorkers have a high school diploma or less, like, we have a lot of work to do to get people into STEM careers and good paying jobs. And to be able to do that, we need to be able to maximize the existing dollars that we're getting. The last thing I will just want to sort of underscore, I was saying to Katie before we started, I took a look at the ERA money. So what New York got during ERA, which was at the height, we had about 800,000 people who were unemployed. We had about $105 or so million that came to the state for workforce. Again, we have close to 5 million people who are unemployed. Like, the scale of this is huge, which means the investment has to be huge in order for us to be able to respond. And so I don't want folks to think that this is a Band-Aid situation. It really is a massive investment that's necessary to support the system.
That scale is incredible. And I'm also really struck by, you know, you pointed to some of the other panelists that were sharing these. You all are doing such innovative things right now in small pockets and where you can with the existing funding. And so you know what works. It's really the investment you need in order to scale it and bring it to more workers. Donnie, what about from your perspective?
Yeah, I think that in the information that Melinda just shared with us is very important. Excuse me. One of the things that we need to look at is every area of the country is also different. And so Melinda was talking just a minute ago about 5 million. That's almost our population in the entire state of Alabama when you look at their unemployment. But each one of those individuals in Alabama might be twice as hard to service because of those barriers of transportation, land mass, those kind of things. And so I'll give you a real example in what the cuts have done. Over the last couple of years, we've gotten around a 9% decrease in funding in WIOA. Well, what that did for communities in southern states like Alabama, Mississippi, and so forth and so on, that have lower populations but large land masses, WIOA funding is based on population. And so what that means to us is that 9% cut across the state actually meant in our region a 58% cut in WIOA funding for our youth services. And in our youth services, we're doing things so innovatively. We're not just doing work-based learning for job training. Every one of our work-based learning jobs is actually ported into a full-time career pathway at one of our industries. And so by cutting that 50% basically as it comes all the way down the pipeline, you actually are seeing less and less people that we're able to put into high-paying industry jobs. And so that's one of the key issues too. I would like to make sure that everybody on the call understands this, is every section of the country is different. And what we do so many times in our workforce initiatives and our funding mechanisms, we actually do a blanket approach, like the southern states are the same as New York, California, Chicago. They're all different. And so there needs to be a targeted approach to workforce development and to funding streams that actually target the needs and actually they're comparative. So just some thoughts there.
And that's such an important message too for some of the Hill staff that are on the phone. So when you've seen that 9% decrease in funding, those are in the recent years when Congress has level funded the workforce system. So we've seen level funding, but have actually seen cuts across states because of the different impacts. So level funding still doesn't mean that your local area, your state is going to be able to get that funding. That's really another reason and another way we've been disadvantaging local areas that need this investment the most. I want to turn now, Brittany, the Community and Technical College in Louisiana. What does the start to the school year look like?
This fall, the percent of course sections for standard in-person delivery decreased from about 78% to 29%. So that difference is reflected in an increase for both hybrid and online delivery. We can survey the students, and we did survey some of them, and it was a concern about COVID and social distancing. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but the career and technical education courses require a lot of in-person hands-on practice to build student competency. And in our community college system, CT courses make up about 62% of our fall credit course offerings. So our community colleges have had to support their faculty through professional development, software acquisition, one-on-one support to transition these courses to a hybrid or online format. This has allowed us to reduce the amount of in-person time required for each student and to enhance that digital literacy that Anson talked about, those skills that the students will need for the 21st century workforce. Some examples of our course design changes have included practical nursing courses being allowed to use simulation, thereby facilitating online instruction and practice in a safe environment. Welding courses using video and tutorial tools to explain and demonstrate techniques prior to the student lab experience. Instrumentation students using technology tools and household items to demonstrate their understanding and competency via video. I just want to point out the need for devices and connectivity in our state for students to remain engaged in coursework is still paramount. At the start of this crisis, our colleges loaned out every device that they had on hand to both students and faculty to assist with the transition. This past summer, when we surveyed those same people, it was estimated that 8,700 students would need a device and almost 6,000 students would need internet connectivity to continue their education. So there's a strong need in our state for support just to expand the basic services that students need to continue.
That's so powerful, Brittany. I'm also struck by how much your system, the community college system, the workforce system, is the nexus of this information about what people need across the state, which is part of what the support through WIOA and through Perkins and through adult ed funding can help do, is leverage and scale those practices and get the information about where people are and what they need. I want to remind folks that attendees can drop questions in the Q&A portion. I'm going to turn to the panelists for one more before we do some of that. But for all of you, kind of, comprehensively thinking about what would additional funding mean for your programs and companies right now. So maybe I'll go round robin, reverse alphabetical order, and Brittany, maybe start again with you.
Sure. Additional funding for us would mean additional opportunities. Facing this global pandemic has created the need to urgently respond to difficult and unprecedented changes. However, as we've met those challenges, we've seen the opportunity to modernize our approach to delivering education and training and providing services to students in Louisiana within all aspects. Additional funds would help us accelerate efficient and effective methods of instruction to enhance this new environment that incorporates virtual educational technologies that are conducive to learning and demonstrate learning outcomes of all trainings. Additional funding is needed, period, to help us with services, supplies, equipment, technology, professional development, digital literacy. We need it. We need it.
That seems to be definitely a theme about how we're getting workers those digital literacy skills. And I want to turn to that after this question and dive a little bit deeper into that. So Melinda, what would additional funding mean for you and your work in New York?
So we're actually in the process right now of bringing together 38 people who are sort of leaders in the business community and workforce development, community colleges, CBOs, across the state to come up with what those strategies look like. And in the short-term bucket, it really means around, again, stabilizing New Yorkers and small businesses, as well as really thinking about how we shift towards subsidized employment opportunities to get people money in their pockets and back to work as quickly as possible. In some of the longer-term frames, it really does go back to the fundamentals, which Katie's talked about. How do we double down on sector partnerships? How do we double down on really thinking about integrated career basic education and adult literacy with skills-based training? How do we really double down on thinking about creating real connections to career pathways, specifically to community college? How do we think about really supporting employers create good quality jobs? This, again, I keep going back to, this isn't rocket science. This isn't like, we don't need a big shiny thing here. We know what we're doing. We have the systems in place. We just don't have the money to do it. And so I kind of want to go back to this, that like in some ways I don't have a fancy idea because we already have the ideas. We just need the money to implement them.
That's so important. Now here's my alphabetical skill struggling. Anson. R comes before A, right? Or after.
Okay, it's okay. So I think folks, Melinda and Brenda or Brittany and Donnie can really speak well to, you know, the helping folks get reemployed topic of this story. I think the thing I want to underscore is that there's also an equal need to make sure folks remain employed and can grow in employment. We've seen in our workers that many of them have become the sole breadwinners in their household, but they need skills, they need raises, they need to be able to communicate and work better with their public schools digitally. We'll come back to that again. But those partnerships we have that we see kind of falling off because of budget shortfalls are really vital to helping folks maintain employment and grow in employment. And so it's two phases or two dimensions we need to look at: helping folks become reemployed, which seems overwhelming sometimes with the unemployment rolls we have right now. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that folks that are employed or marginally employed need to get rebuilt from part-time to full-time, from full-time to higher skilled. And that's also something that the public systems are excellent at, and that we need their support, cooperation, and resources from in terms of ideas.
Exactly, keeping people on the job, and that false choice that so often the workforce system has to make between workers who are out of the job or on the job and need skills, again, because the system isn't funded adequately, but both are necessary right now. That's an important point. Donnie, I'll turn to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we're looking at and are dealing with is in our state and region, so many areas actually have more jobs than we have people to fulfill those jobs. And so the funding that we need is so critical in preparing people for the jobs of the future. And we've talked about that in the call, but I think it's really important for our Hill staff to really understand. And I can't, Melinda said it perfectly. We have the programs that are working. I mean, if you look at the modeling that we're doing, I mean, even this morning we started in Selma, Alabama. Many of you probably have heard of Selma, Alabama. It's a rural community in the Black Belt, and they had a crisis for healthcare workers. And just this morning, we've already got close to 100, and it started at 8 o'clock in a small rural town. We have the ability to do what we need. It's having the funding and the streams of that funding coming down to these programs. And we like to push industry-driven programs because these programs need to have jobs tied to them. And that's what gets people into the programs and successfully completing those programs. And so that's very important to have a dialogue and a collaboration between industry and our programs like WIOA and our job training programs and our placement programs through our career centers.
Such a good point. Rebecca, I'll turn to you now.
Great. Well, I think for us as a small business community, having additional funds would mean that we know when we have to lay off our employees, and to know that they're able to be taken care of and learn new skills and continue on. Because like I had said, for anybody who's in the small business community, your employees are your family. So this has been very difficult to, see so many people, out of work. So having that extra money to help them, move to the next level and to train, I think would be very, very important and vital. But also on the flip of that is, when things start, picking up again, and hopefully when we start, getting back to work, to be able to, participate in the training programs and to get good skilled workers who have been, trained properly. And we don't know what, the future holds. We as Diego and Son Printing are pivoting all the time. So, we might not go back to big manufacturing presses. Things are changing for us. So having people with, digital skills and different skills, it will be beneficial to our business.
Yeah, I heard a couple of key themes that each of you was raising up that I just want to really emphasize for folks listening, and then turn to one question that we got around the digital literacy piece. So, Melinda and Donnie, both of you hit really hard the fact that the workforce and current technical education systems knows what works, and we need the public investment in order to support that. Brittany, I heard you describing the innovation that the state's already leading on, and thinking about, how quickly you're adapting to the new reality, and the way that you're doing that with existing funding, but the greater scale that could happen, the more workers that could be served if there were additional funding. And then Anson and Rebecca, I heard you both talking about the importance for skilling existing workers, and how the public investments really help scale the private investments that you all are already making. And Rebecca, you referenced the fact that the workers that at Diego and Son are really part of your family, and that you're making these private investments in those workers, and that by investing in the public supports and systems that can scale those, that's what creates that sustainable pipeline. I want to turn back now to the theme that we keep coming back to for digital literacy. I mentioned a report that I think we're going to drop in the chat box that one of my colleagues, Amanda Burks and Shilcock, just released that found that nearly a third of U.S. workers have low or no digital skills. As workplaces continue to automate, both in response to the crisis and because of the path that we were already on before that, what role do businesses in the workforce and education systems have in ensuring that workers have digital literacy skills necessary both to learn for new programs and the occupational digital literacy necessary to succeed in those jobs? Anson, I'll turn to you because you're off mute, I think, so start with you, but I want to be sure that Melinda, Brittany, Rebecca, Donnie, each of you get a chance to touch on this in the next couple of minutes, and then we'll sign off right at 12.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of one of the things the pandemic has brought to light for us is that digital literacy is as fundamental as reading, writing, math, or speaking English. You can't get a job without applying online. You can't do most training unless you do some of it online or all of it online. And then we see our public school students online, and parents are struggling to be supports to the public education system. I think it's vital that we raise it front and center. It's still seen as kind of this extra little competency that's floating out there when in fact it's been with us for many years. I worked 20 years ago with a major company that was determining whether it was a good idea to move their application process online, and they determined at the time no, because they didn't think that the folks that worked in their establishments would have the skills to apply for the jobs. Unfortunately, that was 20 years ago. We're still kind of in the same place sometimes in terms of the focus we put on digital literacy. Amanda's report that you referenced earlier really underscores this. And if anybody kind of reflects in their own life, they'll see that, you know, digital literacy is just ubiquitous out there for everybody. Why would it be different for those out there struggling to find work, or those in the workforce that are being faced with technology as plants, which have been doing for years, are automating? They're only going to automate more. And, businesses don't want to lose those incumbent workers. Those workers are trusted. They have loyalty. They know the systems at a business. But it's too often the case, I think, that we're not thinking about how to maintain their ability to be durable as the workplace changes. And that's something I think we need to place front and center with reading, writing, math, and English as a second language.
That's such a good point. Melinda, can I turn to you?
Sure. In fact, I was looking here because we're, again, going back to this big group we're convening. We're talking about digital literacy as well as a key component of something that we need to focus on. Some of the data that sort of describes to us is like in our state, it's the work we've done over the last decade around access. So making sure that people have access to broadband. Well, what it doesn't actually translate to is to people actually being able to afford broadband. And so, we know that the FCC puts out the Lifeline program, which is a really low cost connection tool for people to access broadband. I think it's like $9 or $10 a month. However, that's still too much for some families and some communities. I have 3 little kids that are in elementary school right now, and we went back to school last week. We do not have enough devices in our family for all of our kids to be doing online learning at the same time. And we don't have the right broadband to be able to have 4 devices operating video at the same time. So I say all that to say that, if my family is unable to manage it, I cannot imagine families, again, who are struggling and on the brink here. And so I think it goes back to this concept of what are the tools, and we've been calling them the new work boots that people need to have. The new set of work boots you need to have a computer, and you need to be able to access broadband and literacy. Because when we talk about equity and opportunity, you're actually eliminating options or opportunity if people cannot work remotely, if you cannot learn remotely. And for us, I really think anything we can do, even aside from money, to any lift regulations or to address any sort of programmatic rules or changes, specifically in the OMB circular around what technology expense means. It's important because we shouldn't be asking people to give us back a $300 Chromebook. We don't ask them to give us back their tools. We don't ask them to give us back their work boots. These truly are the tools that people need to be successful in the workplace.
It seems so common sense, and I'm just struck by how much it's making the other panelists laugh, that of course we shouldn't do that, but it sounds for people.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah. So I want to give space to anyone else who wants to respond to this, and then I want to give everybody 45 seconds just to close out and share anything that we didn't get to touch on in our last 5 minutes here. I am not going to do anything creative without the alphabetical order this time. So I'm just going to go in the order of my screen. And Donnie, I'll start with you, then Anson, then Melinda, Brittany, and Rebecca will end with you.
Yeah, I really appreciate all the panelists and your wisdom, and it's so important to understand the needs. That's one of the other issues that we have is I think a lot of people want to talk about workforce. 5 years ago, it wasn't the big sexy. Now I think everybody's title has the word workforce in it in some way if you're going to be somebody moving up. But when you look at this and we're talking about digital literacy, I think another thing that we need to focus on nationwide, and we're hearing this, even I had a conversation over in Europe yesterday, and they're having the same issues, is not only digital literacy, but financial literacy as well. I think that's important. And then we also focusing on essential skills or soft skills, as many of our industries call it. Combining those into our programs is so important, all the way down to pre-K. We need to be able to utilize that. And a lot of the focus that we have is just on our adult education models in workforce development, but we need to begin to prepare our students all the way down in these different areas, because it's got to be a real partnership between education and workforce development and our employers. And I think that's the overall focus that we really need to have, even in our funding streams, is to make sure that our funding is results oriented, is focused on meeting the real needs, not the political needs. And also it pushes partnerships. When I say push, I mean forces partnerships, because, one of the biggest issues that we have in a lot of programs statewide and nationwide is egos and fights over funding. And so if we can alleviate those two things, we're going to really be able to help people. And that's the folks that need jobs.
Yeah, let me go ahead and underscore a couple of points. One, we're in unprecedented times in terms of kind of excruciating pressures. A lot of focus has been on unemployment insurance and funds there. Oftentimes that's confused, though, with workforce development, which is separate and equally important. And so I think in terms of when you look at macro funding, those are things to balance, and they're both equally important. And then within workforce development, you've got the unemployed and the employed, the underskilled and the higher skilled upskilling pieces of it. They're all equally important, and then they all work together. I have noticed over the last probably 5 years, especially companies, and especially big companies, Fortune 100 companies, Fortune 500 companies, that are now claiming space in partnerships with public agencies. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that WIOA has helped align those public systems more closely with employers, and helped us help those in the public sector really understand how to work with employers. When you have a measure that's called effectiveness in serving employers, you really start wondering and doing some soul searching as to what extent you're actually doing that in your communities. And I think that lesson has paid off. I agree with the comment that Melinda said earlier about, like, there's really not a new shiny idea out there. The expertise is out there. And it's really jettisoned and advanced in the last few years, I can tell you that. And now the private sector is saying, hey, this makes sense to me. I want to play in that space. And I think it's something that brings a multiplier effect. When you work with a business, no matter if it's a small business like Rebecca's or a Fortune 100 company like Tyson Foods, there's a multiplier effect. And you're creating a relationship with that business. You're creating opportunities for new workers and employment, but you're also creating commitments to help each other understand how best to keep folks employed and maintain strong relationships during economic crises. The pandemic will end, but there's always going to be hurricanes, natural disasters, big recessions, and massive layoffs. I've worked through multiple examples of all of those, and every time we're often scrambling. And we can learn a lot from this situation we're in right now in terms of that public-private relationship. And that's definitely something I think the private sector is very interested in doing.
Thank you so much, Anson. Melinda.
Yeah, so I'll be brief. I think it really comes down to, we have in some ways one shot to fix a lot of what we didn't do after the last recession. And for us and for New York, I think we're really taking a keen approach around equity and inclusion, and really thinking about how this recovery is equitable, how there is expanded opportunity, how we decrease the number of people who are in low-wage work. Again, when we think about the last decade, the fact that the vast majority of jobs that were created paid less than $32,000 a year in our state, it says something. And I think, again, for us, I think the government has a really important role in providing resources to create change and to improve communities. And ultimately, in some ways, what the feds decide is in how we sort of direct and focus our attention on the ground. And so, again, I really encourage folks to take this opportunity to leave us off in a better spot than we were when we started.
I'll just make 2 quick comments. Number one is to remember that we need a systematic process to meet the needs of our communities. That's bringing everyone to the table, K-12, adult education, business and industry, everybody. We have to align the resources that we have. The second thing is to think about something that Melinda said. We have structures already in place. It's just remembering that we need funding to be able to sustain these things. The CARES Act, how long is that funding going to last? You know, what's going to happen later? We need to make sure that we have some funding to be able to sustain and continue on the best practices and things, the innovations that we're creating. So I ask, you know, everybody to keep that in mind.
Great. Excuse me. I just want to say thank you very much, Katie, and thanks, Blue, for letting me participate again and be a voice for small business and micro businesses across the U.S. It has been a difficult time, and you know, whenever we get to participate in these programs, you know, it always makes you realize how important the small business community is to the end user, you know, of these programs. So again, I just, you know, want to say thank you for letting us be participating in these programs and speak for small businesses. And I hope I do them proud.
You absolutely do. Everyone does. Donnie, Anson, Melinda, Brittany, Rebecca, thank you all so much for your time, for sharing your expertise. For participants who are joining us today or who are watching these recordings, we're happy to put you in touch with any of the panelists and connect you with their expertise as well. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.